Hello everyone, I'm here at White Waltham and welcome to my second video in my historic airplane series. Today I got something really special for you. With me today I've got a Mark V Spitfire, just like the one I have here today, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Andy Preece. And I'm sure you guys are really interested in finding out about this plane. I'm really interested, so let's go talk to the pilot. Hello, my name's Travis Ludlow.
Hi Travis.
Hi, I'd like to talk to you about the aircraft.
Yeah, sure.
So how does it feel to have the job that every boy grows up dreaming of?
Well, how can I start? It's absolutely the best privilege in the world. It's an extremely privileged position. I never in a million years thought I'd ever get to fly a lovely machine like this, let alone as a current RAF pilot as well. So it is my boyhood dream. It really is. Okay, so how easy is it to fly a Spitfire? Well, once you're in the air, she's beautiful. She's absolutely beautiful. There's the old adage that if an aeroplane looks nice, she'll fly nice, and I'm sure you'll agree she's an absolute beauty. So in terms of once you're in the air, she's very much like a modern aircraft in some respects. So the sort of thing that you would have learnt to fly in, she will be very similar, albeit a much more powerful engine. But where she comes into her own is on the ground. So taking off, but especially landing, is quite tricky. You can see that in the position that she's in at the moment, the attitude on the ground, if you imagine sitting in there, you can't see anything out of the front. So you're very much where you'd be used to in a modern aircraft, looking out of the front cockpit, and you can see the runway and you can see the aspect of the ground. In an aircraft like this, it's very difficult to see. So you do heavily rely on what you can see left and right of the nose, and you become very more aware of what your feet are doing. Certainly as a modern day fast jet pilot, your feet don't really have to do a lot in the air. But flying an aircraft like this, they have to be very active indeed. So that's where you would find it tricky if anybody else were just to try and jump in and fly one.
Could I fly a Spitfire?
I'm sure you could, Travis. I'm sure you could with the right training. Now, one huge difference compared to a modern aircraft again is the position of the third wheel, if you like. So I'm sure that the aeroplane you've been flying has got a nose wheel, yes. But this one being a tail wheel aircraft. So I think if you'd never experienced flying a tail wheel aircraft, then you'd definitely have to do some sort of conversion training. But again, you know, if I could somehow teleport you into the air and then give you control, I'm sure you'd get along absolutely fine. But I think you'd be quite alarmed at the landing at the end of it compared to what you're used to. But otherwise, no, with the right experience, if I can do it, I'm sure you could do it.
Is a Spitfire much better than a ME-109?
Oh, the old everlasting argument. It's a really difficult one to answer, to be honest. I think it was very much a race. So you could argue at various stages during that race, each type of aircraft had the upper hand. But certainly, so we could talk for hours on this subject. But there were very clear differences between the two aircraft, which would pitch one against the other. So initially, for instance, the 109 was somewhat faster than a Spitfire. At different heights, the Spitfire would outperform the 109 and vice versa for the other way. The things that often aren't talked about are things like the handling capabilities on the ground. So by no means is a Spitfire easy to land or to get airborne, particularly on an airfield like this. But the 109 was even more difficult. So the Germans lost an awful lot of pilots in takeoff and landing accidents. We did as well, but I think the 109 was very much trickier to fly. The Spitfire, I mean, this is a very early model, this is a Mark V, but the bubble canopy gave excellent all-round visibility, and even better in the later Marks, whereas the 109 had quite a concealed canopy and it was very difficult to see out of. So that's a difference. The other one, which is often spoken about with the early Mark Spitfires, with a Merlin engine, if you push the stick forward, so if you had somebody behind you and you needed to try and get some airspeed to get away, the Merlin engine had no negative G capability at that time. So if you did just bump forwards to try and get some energy, the engine would cough and splutter and you'd lose power, whereas the 109 was injected. So the pilots of the 109 had a slight edge there, because if you were trying to dive down in a Spitfire, you'd have to roll upside down and pull through first. So lots of different things, so very difficult to say. But by the end of the war, certainly the way the Spitfire developed, it was certainly a far more superior aircraft towards the end.
Do you think the Spitfire was the best fighter of World War II?
Of course. But I am very biased. I mean, for me, I haven't flown any of the others apart from the Hurricane. So for me, certainly, she's an absolute beaut. But probably overall, the most successful fighter, certainly from our side of the fence anyway. Absolutely, without doubt, the Spitfire.
How does it differ from a modern aircraft?
Oh, I mean, in so many different ways, she's different. To be honest, the other aircraft we've got is the Hurricane, and they were only, in terms of first flight and into service development, they were only a year apart. But the two aircraft now to fly, the Hurricane is like flying a vintage aircraft, but flying a Spitfire, I think, is rather akin to flying an aircraft from the 1970s. So in some respects, she does handle, for an aircraft of her age, you wouldn't think that you were flying an aircraft of that age. But we've already discussed the tail wheel. You still do get that in modern aircraft, particularly with aerobatic aeroplanes, but most modern day aircraft have the wheel at the front because it's far easier to take off and land. She is all mechanically controlled, so the flying controls are pure fly-by-wire. There's no hydraulic assistance or anything. She is purely on there. The engine is all manually controlled, so with our aircraft we're always trying to fly them well away from what they're capable of to ensure that they'll last for a long, long time. So we're having to manually govern everything with the engine. So I'm always looking at the RPM, the boost, so the power variances, and everything in that cockpit is manual. So the controls, if you look at the control surfaces, they are exactly the same as a modern aircraft. You'll notice the tail, if you look at the tail, actually the elevator and the rudder are still canvas covered. And that, that remained true for the entire Spitfire development, whereas most modern aeroplanes, if it's of aluminium construction, then the whole thing will be. So the bare bones aeroplane is very similar. Where it really does differ is inside the cockpit, and you can see all the instruments are era correct, and it's they're very fundamental, very basic instrumentation. But to all intents and purposes, once you're in the air, it's the good old, the stick does the same thing as do the rudder and the throttle.
So can you tell me what armaments the Spitfire would have used?
Yeah. So shall we wander through to the front, and I can actually show you.
Yep.
So this is a Mark V Spitfire, and I spoke earlier about how the Spitfire developed through the years, but this was fitted with so the wings differed. Effectively, the fuselage remained the same to all intents and purposes, although it did grow as the engines got bigger. But the wing was one of the biggest developments. So the early Spitfires, they went through alphabetically. So the Alpha wing was the first one. This is a B wing, and so you asked about the armament. So the B wing was the first to actually encompass a cannon. So early on, you can see these here. These are the machine gun covers, okay? So these are Browning 303 machine guns, and the initial wing had 4 of those on each wing. But the Germans started putting lots of armour into their bombers and things, so effectively these became almost like pea shooters, if you will. So the next movement to that was to fit these. So these are a 20mm cannon. So you're going for, in terms of firepower, the 303 round is kind of about the size of my little finger, whereas you can see the end here, that's the same sort of diameter as the width of my thumb, and you can imagine the difference in firepower that's going to give. Now, what most people don't realise is the guns, it did increase a little bit, but early on, the guns, we could carry about 300 rounds per gun. And of course, you see all the films, the World War II films, and everyone's dogfighting, and they're pressing the fire button, and they've got sort of minutes and minutes worth of firepower. In reality, the weapons load that an early Spitfire could carry, if you pressed the trigger and held it, the bullets would run out after about 16 seconds. So yeah, quite conservative one needed to be when firing. They tended to fire in just short bursts to conserve the ammunition, because even with a 2-second burst, you could burn through 300 rounds. So pretty quick to run out of bullets.
And how many real Spitfires are still flying?
Well, it's incredible, but there were over 20,000 Spitfires built during the war. Now, the actual figure, it does vary from any time, but out of that 20,000, there are around about at any one time, probably a maximum of 60 flying at any one time. Now, the reason I say it varies is because every now and again, one will be airworthy and then something happens to it and it'll be taken off. But I think in the world at the moment, we're up at around about 60. And on BBMF up at Coningsby, we're lucky enough to have 6 of those, of varying marks.
What is the significance of the markings on this Spitfire?
On this particular one? Well, so all our Spitfires at BBMF, as per all of our aeroplanes, have 2 stories. So what we have is the actual airframe as they came off the production line, and the the physical registration number, in this case AB910, has its own history. But every time the aircraft go through a major service, we take the opportunity to have them painted in a historically significant colour scheme. So this one, she's been painted in the colours of Flight Lieutenant Tony Cooper, who was a pilot with 64 Squadron around the time of D-Day. And so on top of the normal camouflage of the time, you can see the black and white stripes, and they're actually D-Day markings. And the significance of these was because we had so many coalition aircraft flying together, it was in a hope that everybody on the same side would recognise these markings and we wouldn't have any sort of friend-on-friend type incidents. But hearing the stories from the pilots themselves, it wasn't always effective, and I know of several incidents where actually there were incidents of our own aircraft getting shot down by Allied aircraft.
And last question, who is Peter John?
Peter John, well, so Tony Cooper, he was a pilot. He actually was flying not this airframe, but the colour scheme it is there to represent. Now, I did say that this very aeroplane was there, so she actually was there. But so Tony was flying this one, and in May that year, so just before D-Day itself, his wife gave birth to their first son, and his name was Peter John. So he had the name painted onto the aircraft, and that's how it appeared. And I think later on, so as he migrated to other types of Spitfires, so Mark II, his Mark 9 rather, his personal aircraft, he always had Peter John with the iteration of the number on the side of it.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks.
Pleasure. And good luck on your flight.
Thank you. All right, thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, please subscribe and give it a like. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. And so as always, see you guys later. Peace.